This is our panel on computational sustainability. I'm Kavita Bala, the Dean of the Bowers College of Computing and Information Science. Today we're going to discuss the field that was created at Cornell more than a decade ago, computational sustainability. And joining me on stage is Carla Gomes, who was the pioneer who created the field. Carla Gomes is the Ronald and Antonia Nielsen Professor of Computing and Information Science in Bowers CIS. She has an appointment in the Dyson School, and she serves as the director of the Institute for Computational Sustainability at Cornell. This morning, Carla got the exciting news that she also won the prestigious ACM AAAI Alan Newell Award exactly for her work on computational sustainability in recognition of that. Perfectly timed just for all of you. We also have with us Alex Flecker, a professor in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, and Daniel Fink, who is a senior research associate at the Lab of Ornithology. So to get us started, we're going to show off a short video of the work in computational sustainability.
If you're sitting at a computer or using your phone to watch this, you're enjoying the finished product of decades of work in computer science, all with the goal to give you access to the information you want, when you want it. Much of this computational brainpower has been used to build highly profitable enterprises. These tech behemoths have permeated modern society, dramatically changing how we move through our lives. But what if some chunk of that brainpower was put into something else? What if it was put into solving the most complex and pressing problems of our time? Problems like poverty, disaster relief, climate change, biodiversity loss, environmental collapse. It turns out this is happening, and it's picking up steam. In a new field called computational sustainability, first coined by Carla Gomes at Cornell University, computer scientists put their muscle toward making the world a more sustainable and livable place. A network called CompSusNet is supercharging progress in computational sustainability by bringing together computer scientists across the world. The goal is to create a mix that allows them to feed off of each other's ideas. These scientists work on projects that might not seem all that related at first. Projects like poverty eradication, biodiversity conservation, and new renewable energy sources. But they use similar computational methods to tackle the core of each problem. For example, using satellite imagery and machine learning to map where poor communities are so they can be better supported, particularly in countries where census data is non-existent. Or combining environmental data with volumes of information collected by volunteer birders, which gives scientists an incredibly detailed look at what habitats are preferred by different bird species, so the most critical places can be protected. Or even using computational techniques to speed up the discovery and testing of new sustainable energy sources. And the list is growing as more computer scientists join in. What makes computational sustainability so powerful and wide-ranging is that a new method, created to solve one problem, can be repurposed for another, totally different problem. The problems may seem completely unrelated, but the solutions pull from the same computational approach. And the beauty of it all is that while computational thinking is moving sustainability forward, sustainability is moving computational thinking forward, by presenting new challenges that, in turn, lead to the creation of new methods in computing. Methods that didn't exist until scientists realized they were needed to make our world run a little more sustainably. If you're interested in learning more about it and maybe jumping in, check out these websites.
Hi, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for coming. I'm waiting for my slides. So thanks, Dean Bala, for leading this panel on computational sustainability. So computers are changing and revolutionizing our lives. The iPhone is the ultimate example of a universal computer. If you add apps, you can change the iPhone into different devices. Unfortunately, the computational revolution has done very little for the sustainability of our planet. In fact, traditionally, computer science actually do not tackle sustainability questions. So our vision is that computer science can and actually should help balancing environmental, economic, and societal needs for a sustainable future. That's why in 2008, with the help of the National Science Foundation, we established the new field of computational sustainability. We've been very busy since then with lots of projects in different areas, such as poverty mitigation, species conservation, climate-smart agriculture, climate-ready and sustainable fisheries, renewable energy, and many more. Alex is going to talk about the hydropower expansion in the Amazon basin, the real Amazon, and Daniel is going to talk about bird conservation. And I will be talking about AI, artificial intelligence, for accelerating discovery of clean energy materials. Meet Sarah. Sarah is the scientific autonomous reason agent for materials discovery. Sarah is an AI robotic scientist that encapsulates the scientific method ranging from formulation of hypotheses, planning, execution, and interpretation of experiments with the production of new knowledge. What you see there is a depiction of Sarah controlling laser spike annealing experiments and also the collection of synchrotron data, X-ray diffraction data for this bismuth oxide system. And what you see there is actually the crystal phase map produced by Sarah for the bismuth oxide system, which is essentially a phase map with the different materials that can be obtained as a function of temperature and dwell time. Sarah uses deep reasoning networks, which is an AI framework that combines deep learning with reasoning for discovery. So I want to give you a bit of a sense how Sarah and DRNets work, and for that I will use a simple example. Can you make sense of these symbols? Well, we see some letters, some numbers, but it's actually difficult to understand what's going on. But now if I tell you that actually these symbols come from two overlapping Sudokus, one using digits from 1 to 9, another one using digits from A to I, and I tell you the Sudoku rules, no repeated symbol in a row, column, and block, now maybe we can start figuring out, but it's still very not trivial. Well, deep reasoning nets actually demix the Sudokus by reasoning and combining deep learning with reasoning using what we call an interpretable space to reason about the Sudoku rules. And this is without data to train on. But more impressive, deep reasoning nets solve a core long-standing problem in material science called the crystal structure phase mapping. And the goal of this problem is to identify and demix crystal structures from X-ray diffraction data. What you see there is 307 unlabeled X-ray diffraction patterns of a system that previously had not been solved, the bismuth copper vanadium oxide system. This system was actually way beyond human capabilities. Well, DRNets now have superhuman capabilities, and here we have the 13 crystal structures that DRNets were able to demix and identify, again, by combining deep learning with reasoning and reasoning about known crystal phases and thermodynamic rules. DRNets actually enabled the discovery of new materials for solar fuels, subsequent experience by our collaborator, John Gregoire, who actually is a Cornell alum and now at Caltech. And I should emphasize that solar fuels, contrarily to solar panel energy, which depends on intermittent sunlight, solar fuels can actually be stored for later usage. So here, this is a very busy slide. I don't expect you to be able to fully grasp it, but the point here, we want to highlight that, you know, across all these projects, there are cross-cutting computational themes. And in fact, this is captured by metaphorical subway lines. Here, what you see is the projects correspond to stations, and the subway lines are computational themes. I talked about the blue line, pattern demixing for demixing Sudokus and crystal structures. And in a recent paper that's entitled Computational Sustainability Meets Material Science, we actually show that, you know, there's tremendous synergies across different problems. And for example, by working on problems to identify and understand species distributions and how species interact, we actually, those models gave us insights to develop better models for predicting multiple properties of materials. Daniel Fink will talk about bird conservation, and Alex will talk about the impacts of dams in the Amazon basin. Finally, let me just mention this CompSustNet, which is a large-scale computational sustainability network started at Cornell and led by Cornell, involving over 300 faculty, students, and collaborators nationally. So, in summary, computational sustainability is a very exciting new research field that started at Cornell, but now is way beyond Cornell. Thank you.
Okay, it's such a pleasure to be here. I grew up in the Bay Area, and the Cal Academy has always been a really special place, so it's really nice seeing people here. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about how we can use AI, artificial intelligence, to reduce the adverse impacts of hydropower expansion. And some of you may not realize that hydropower is proliferating around the world. And it's places like the Amazon basin where we work, where in the Amazon there's about 350 proposed large dams. Now, the Amazon is the largest and most biodiverse river system in the world, and it's also a region where the lives of people are intimately tied to the rhythm of rivers. So we can ask, among these 350 proposed large dams, are there some configurations that are better than others in terms of trying to meet some energy targets, but do so with as little environmental damage as possible? So how do we do that? Well, let me walk you through. And so this cartoon on the left, on the horizontal axis is hydropower generation, and then on the vertical axis is ecological value. So that's a suite of environmental criteria, and we're going to focus on one, connectivity, which tells us how connected together is a river network. And connectivity is important. So dams, they block the migration of fish that are the mainstay of fisheries. They also interfere with navigation. Dams trap sediments, and those sediments carry nutrients to the floodplains where floodplain agriculture occurs. And those sediments also help build those floodplains. So in the cartoon in the upper left is a river network, and there's no dams. And so that's great in terms of the ecological value, but it doesn't help generate electricity. And then on the bottom right is that same river network, and now all proposed dams have been built. So that generates a lot of power, but it comes at a big environmental cost. So we can move from one side to the other. And as we do that, we can find the best portfolios. We call that the Pareto frontier. So what that means is that for any particular energy target, that's the configuration of dams that produces that electricity, but does so with as little environmental damage as possible, in this case to connectivity. And then we can start comparing different portfolios that generate the same amount of electricity. So in this example, the portfolio on top is a preferred solution because it keeps the river network more connected together. All right, now so computing these best portfolios is challenging for the entire Amazon. And that's not only because of the vast area of the Amazon, but there's a tremendous number of combinations in the neighborhood of 10 to the 105th power. And just for perspective, the estimated number of seconds since the Big Bang is 10 to the 17th. So using AI, Carla's group has figured out a way to wade through all these combinations, and that provides insights then that can be really valuable for hydropower planning. All right, so what we find is that coordinated planning leads to better outcomes. And for this room of people, that may not be surprising at all, but that's not the way that hydropower is planned. Hydropower is planned project by project. It's not planned by, again, looking at large numbers of portfolios. So here this shows the original best portfolios. So these are the best portfolios before any dams were built in the Amazon, and you see that in yellow. And then in purple are the original worst portfolios. Now the first dam was built in the Amazon in 1914, and we can ask, how have things looked historically? And what you can see is that in 2011, so almost 100 years after that first dam, the Amazon remains fairly connected together. But then over just this past decade, things have changed dramatically, and there's been this big loss of connectivity due to a number of very impactful projects. All right, the difference between the portfolio in 2020 and then this original best portfolio, this different combination, all right, in yellow, the difference there is the foregone environmental benefits. So these are the environmental costs of the lack of coordinated planning. And then just moving forward, once again using AI, Carla's group then has come up with the best achievable portfolio. Okay, and so this is, again, from where we're at, all right, these are the best potential outcomes. And this is important for really identifying very bad projects. And it's also important for just knowing what our options are moving forward given the expansion of hydropower. And we work with other criteria as well. So one is just trying to avoid the worst greenhouse gas emissions. And we find that some Amazon dam portfolios, they emit so much greenhouse gases that they're worse than burning coal. So those are ones that you just want to get off the table. And then I'll just close by saying that sustainability solutions require interdisciplinary teams. And we have a great team at Cornell, and we work with our South American partners and partners from elsewhere. And state-of-the-art computation is going to play a really central role here. So thank you so much.
Hi, I'm very excited to be here. Okay, we'll try again. I wanted to take a couple of minutes and tell you about citizen science, AI, and how we're using it to advance conservation. And it looks like we're good. Okay, so why birds? Birds are proven indicators of biodiversity and environmental health, and they're enjoyed by millions of people around the world. eBird is a citizen science project that's run by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and it's designed to harness the excitement and passion of bird watchers by engaging them to submit their observations of birds. It's also become incredibly popular. So it's grown into one of the largest biodiversity databases in existence today. If you look at this map, every point indicates a single individual eBird search. There's a huge number. We if you see the extent and the resolution of this data, you get a sense of what the potential is to fill in gaps in biodiversity information. It's really unique. So I want to give you an example. This is the yellow warbler. It's a species that's migrating through California right now. One thing that we've done is we've been able to aggregate information from individual bird watchers into a unique collective view of the entire population. That's what you're looking at in the map on the right. The colors indicate the range of the species. The darker colors indicate where that population is most concentrated. What's amazing is there's enough information that eBirders have collected to track this population week by week throughout the entire year as it migrates across the entire continent. If you look at where the concentrations are, you can see detailed spatial patterns. That's information about resource use for the species. You can track this throughout the whole year. It's a huge amount of information. But I want to impress upon you, what you're looking at is not just a picture of those raw eBird checklists, those counts that I showed you before. This is the product of a complex analysis that requires thousands of hours of computing. This is where the AI comes in. To go from the raw eBird data to that kind of rigorous scientific product that I showed you, we start with the eBird observations. We add remote sensing data from NASA and other sources. By correlating that information on the ground with what people observe, we can fill gaps in space and time where people haven't made observations. And we combine that with information about the observers themselves and how they search. This is critically important because citizen science projects are biased. It allows the models we use to correct for that bias. Together, that puts a giant data stream, a rich data stream. And initially, we tried to analyze that using off-the-shelf statistical and machine learning methods, but they were woefully inadequate. They weren't up to the point where we could actually use them for conservation. That began over a decade of collaboration with researchers in Carla's group and the computational sustainability community. Based on those innovations, we've been able to create a workflow where we can analyze thousands of species all over the world. Now, I want to give you two brief examples of how this information is being used today for conservation. The first one concerns estimating the collision risk for bald eagles at new wind farm sites. Up until very recently, the US Fish and Wildlife Service didn't have a comprehensive US-wide idea or understanding of the population of this species. And because of that, they were forced to treat every proposed wind farm site as a high collision risk site. And that required 2 years of data collection, which is an impediment to actually getting the renewable energy resources in place. Using the information we've developed, so high-resolution weekly estimates of this population, the service biologists were able to identify areas that had low year-round collision risk. And that enabled them to streamline their policy for permitting. This area here in green shows where those regions of low risk are. Within these regions, they removed that 2-year data collection requirement. This is the tricolored blackbird. This is a species with over 95% of its year-round population here in California. For decades, biologists have been very concerned about this species because of the steep population declines. However, they haven't been able to give it protection because there wasn't a consistent, reliable source of statewide information about this population. This map on the right is a trend map based on eBird data. It shows the annual percent change in the population from 2007 to 2019. Areas in red show declines. You can see it's almost entirely red. Overall, this population has declined by over 1/3 during this time period. Using this information, the tricolored blackbird was listed, and it's now a protected species. So I just want to finish and say, eBird as a citizen science data source has a huge potential to advance sustainability and help to better balance biodiversity needs and human development. But to do this requires the input of computational sustainability and the computation to be able to go from raw data into reliable, actionable information. Thank you.
Great, so now we're going to move on to the panel where I actually get to ask you the behind-the-scenes questions. So I'll start off with Carla. Carla, in 2000, so a lot of people are applying artificial intelligence for all things now. But I just want to know, I've been a colleague of Carla for a long time. In 2008, when she first had her vision of computational sustainability, the idea of applying AI to sustainability, nobody was thinking about that problem at all. And she won this incredibly prestigious NSF expedition. So for those of you who don't know, they give her just a handful, a few of them per year, for the boldest and the most visionary ideas that are out there that they believe will have an impact on the world. And indeed, and many projects start off that way, but don't necessarily achieve their potential. Carla got the first expedition and did so much with it. She got a second expedition, which as far as I know, has been unheard of in NSF history. And because of she just really showed the impact of this visionary idea. So with that, how did you conceive of the idea of applying AI for sustainability at that time?
So that's a very good question. I should start by saying, Cornell is the best place to do interdisciplinary research. And yes, and computing and information science, as you know, Kavita was created, it's still a recent college, but with the vision of, computer science can permeate different disciplines. And, I subscribe to this view that indeed computer science should permeate and definitely impact different fields. But having said that, to be honest, pre-tenure or up to my tenure, I would focus on, publish or perish. So basic research, what we call basic research, foundational research, and that is working on, general methodologies, but without a particular purpose in terms of an application. Like I studied Sudokus or Latin squares or, networks, etc., but without a particular purpose. But, at some point I thought that it could be interesting to actually do something different. And I came across an article in the science section of the New York Times on the Y2Y problem, that is connecting the Yellowstone to Yukon with the wildlife corridors to protect endangered species. And I thought, wow, this is so exciting, and that is what we call the network design problem, because think of a landscape as parcels, a grid, and you want to connect reserves and find a connected component, maximizing utility for the species and satisfying budget constraints, etc. So I thought, oh, I can help here. And talking to my colleagues, John Conrad and Greg Poe, resource economists, they identified the students. Students are the bridges, and he actually was very much interested in this problem. I also identified a student in computer science, Bistra Dilkena, and this problem really was the start. In fact, we started working on this, and pretty soon we were approached by the US Forest Service to actually work on corridors, wildlife corridors for grizzly bears and wolverines, etc. And I start thinking that, these problems are very exciting. We can actually apply computer science with a purpose, but, more interestingly, or also interesting, these problems are unique and lead to new methodologies in computer science. And in fact, just if I wanted to design a little corridor connecting reserves, I would use what we call the Steiner tree problem. That's the same algorithm that we use when you are doing Zoom, how to connect computers to do Zoom. You use this algorithm. But for species now, we need a more complex algorithm because we have different requirements, etc. So basically, that's then when Kavita mentioned the call for these proposals, and SF was the big catalyst, because they wanted us to put forward a big vision for computer science, and at the time I thought, well, I'm not going to get this grant probably, so I'm just going to go out and come up with a big vision. And with our colleagues, we came up with computational sustainability, and frankly, the funds really allowed us to tackle many, many problems. And it has been very, very exciting.
Thank you. Yeah. And now, you know, other universities are trying to emulate this. So they have hired, many of them have hired actually Carla students. Bistra is one of the students that in fact got hired. So she has spread this idea in various different universities. Alex, I'd love to ask you about how the Amazon project got started, and also about the partners, because that was a very complex project with amazing experts from various parts.
Well, thanks, Dean Bala, for that question. So the way that this project got started is, I mean, I'm a river ecologist, and most of the work that I had done before this dams project was, I mean, studying the way rivers work. And I've worked for a long time in South America, and we had this National Science Foundation grant that was about vulnerability of species to climate change, probably more related to the next panel. But it was during this period, this 7-year period, that I watched the largest hydropower project go in Ecuador, and it turned out that it was sitting at the base of one of the most active volcanoes in the world. And at the same time, there were these maps coming out that were showing hundreds of proposed dams in the Amazon. And it just seemed so crazy to me, you know, where they were placing this dam. And I just started wondering, all right, how is it that you would think about alternative ways to, places to site dams? And this colleague that Carla mentioned, Greg Poe, his close friend who was in the Dyson School, an environmental economist. I mean, we started talking about, or he started telling me about how an economist would think about it and these trade-off analyses, and it's like, you have to go talk to Carla. And Carla and I had known each other. Our kids played baseball together, and we had said, oh, you know, sometime we have to work on something together. And so, again, this was years after that. But Greg and Carla and I, we got together and started describing this problem. And Carla looks at me and she says, wow, you don't really know what you're asking. Like, I don't know how anybody would do this. And I just went, I'm thinking, wow, I guess that's the end of that idea. But instead, she says, I only work on problems that nobody knows how to do. And so I'm really interested in this, all right? And so that's what really got this project off the ground, right? And in terms of partners, I mean, we've built this amazing partnership, and it's been really a fantastic project. So there's about 40 people that are part of our group, and it involves academics, it involves conservation organizations, it involves governmental organizations, and some of the partners, we have, again, a great team at Cornell from, I think, across 4 different colleges. We have these amazing partners in South America. I mean, the best hydrologists, the people that really know those fish better than anyone else, and so forth. And again, it's just been this real pleasure, all right, working with this group on this theme. And just, I'm going to say one other thing, that, I mean, Cornell is just, you know, it's the best place to work on these kinds of things. And I mean, the Atkinson Center, for example, I mean, there's 600 faculty that, or more, all right, that are engaged in sustainability. And one of the things is, again, they provide seed grants, but you have to work across departments. You have to get out of your own little, you know, your islands, all right? And so that's just part of the Cornell culture. And
anyway. Thank you, and I'll actually comment, this is a very uniquely or actually very standard Cornell story, but unique because it's part of our story. The fact that you find a collaborator at baseball games is just like, that's actually part of why maybe we collaborate so much. There's a lot of mixing of faculty across very different disciplines. And the culture, and we were discussing this earlier just at dinner with the Morgans, and that was the question, right? Is it our location that brings us all together so we collaborate with each other? That's one reason. And I think it's also this desire to collaborate, of course. You could just say and talk about baseball, but you chose to also talk about research at some point. So thank you. And Daniel, I'm going to ask you actually about citizen science and how that connects up with the computational sustainability and the work that you do.
Sure. When I think about computational sustainability and citizen science, I think of, on the one hand, like I showed, there's great potential in the data that we're collecting, the volume, the resolution, but there are some serious challenges. One of the reasons why citizen science has taken a while to be taken up is because the scientific community knows about how biased that data can be, how noisy it can be, and so it's required years of work to bring that to the level where it's actually being used. We've done work with Carla's group on being able to address those kinds of biases. The other challenge that's been huge is just being able to deal with the volume of data and the amount of information. So one of the projects we're working on now that's really exciting involves the modeling of many species at once. The work that I showed, what we do is we look at one species at a time, and the computational burden is huge. It's millions of CPU hours every year that we use. What we're working on now models hundreds of species, an entire community all at once, and it's incredibly efficient. So that's going to be a huge advance. What's even more exciting is that the information that we'll be able to pull out of that is going to be much richer because it describes an entire community and how the species interact as well as how they're attached to the environment. It's another Cornell story. It's being led by a postdoc who's now working permanently at the Lab of Ornithology and someone who was an undergraduate at Cornell as well. So it has deep Cornell roots.
Thank you. All right, I know we're short on time, so I'm going to ask you to all keep your answers to a minute. But Carla, I'm going to ask you a question. I know the answer, but I'd love for them to hear it. We've talked about how computer science plays a role in sustainability, but there's not well, it could be a unidirectional flow, but that's not, I know how you see it. So how has actually sustainability changed how you believe computer science is being?
Yes, that's a good question. I actually typically say that computational sustainability is a two-way street because on one hand, we really hope to impact the sustainability questions and the challenges, but what is also quite exciting is it's also an incredible opportunity for us because we are exposed to new problems. For example, I mentioned the corridors or the crystal structure phase mapping that are really challenging, and as Alex said, I like going for challenging problems for which there are no trivial solutions, otherwise they would not need me. And so it pushes us really to, and we make a point of addressing the real problems, not fake approximations of the problem. So it pushes us actually to advance methodologies in computer science. For example, the RNets really are a fundamentally new framework combining reasoning and learning to handle cases when we don't have labeled data. So it's truly a true way street where not only do we advance and hopefully help address sustainability challenge, we are actually advancing our own field, creating new methodologies that then are applied to a variety of problems. And if I may say, it also has had, and I've seen this, a tremendous impact in terms of even the diversity. You know, people or students who normally would not be attracted to computer science because they don't like, you know, the topics, they actually are excited about working on computational sustainability questions like Bistra Dilkina. She loves working on the sustainability questions on corridors, wildlife corridors, etc. So it has been very exciting.
Thanks. So Alex, to you, when I saw that graph and the drop to 2011 and 2012, like my heart just sank, right? It was just horrific to watch that negative impact. So how do you think that the work that you guys are doing will get actually adopted into real world, changing policies and countries so we don't see those kinds of precipitous drops?
Yeah, no, that's just such a great question and such an important question. And I mean, yeah, so who's listening? And I mean, for us, it's really been important working with these conservation NGOs that are, and we're working with the in-country NGOs of some, well-known organizations, all right? So, I think, and they're the ones that have the real more direct pathways, to the government ministries. But I think for us at least, one of the most exciting things is, so recently the International Hydropower Association got in touch, all right? And I mean, they've been following our work. And this is this organization that its members are large hydropower companies. There are 120 nations and government ministries, development banks, and so forth. And they have, I mean, they're interested in sustainable hydropower, all right? And the way that they may think about sustainable hydropower might be a little bit different than I would as an ecologist. But again, their hearts are really into sustainable hydropower, all right? And they have a sustainable hydropower protocol, but it's dam by dam. And what they're really interested in working with us, because what we have, I think, is it's like really a first filter where we can look at these big portfolios and we have these tools to, again, get these worst projects just off the table and also be able to say, look, these ones are potentially more promising, and then they can follow up with, again, their own protocols.
Great, thank you. And I know we're into overtime, so Daniel, one last question. So you said you could use the kind of work you're doing for wind farm permits. What other kinds of problems? But a short response, because people need to go and get prepared.
30 seconds.
And then you can ask him later for
I see the red flashing light.
Yeah, no, it's very angry with us, the timer. Just ignore the timer.
That idea of being able to balance biodiversity needs and human development is it's really exciting because the work is being taken up in a number of ways to address that. Maybe just a couple of examples. Here in the United States, where there's actually a fair number of resources and a lot of data, we're seeing interest from governmental agencies and NGOs. For example, the Sustainable Forestry Institute is really interested in our joint distribution models as a way to be able to balance their needs and manage their portfolio. Internationally, in other places where there are fewer resources and less data on biodiversity, we're seeing a great interest as well. Even in Costa Rica, the Ministry of Environment and Energy is in the process of formally adopting some of our data products to monitor biodiversity and report to the UN. And the Humboldt Institute in Colombia is also in a similar situation. So there's a wide and growing, there's a hunger for this. It's really exciting to see it take off.
Thank you. Well, I know we're out of time, so I know they're going to be there available to talk to, so please come and grab them. They have a lot more to share. It's been 14 years of amazing work in this space, and you just saw a sliver of it. So thank you to the panelists.